Good morning, council members, state officials, and workers, and the community. As you know, we typically hold our council meetings the first Tuesday of every month, but the special meeting of the Social Equity Council is being held for two reasons. First, to hear from Assistant Attorney General Christine Jean Lewis, who has graciously given her time to evaluate the legislation that guides our work in terms of our roles and responsibilities. And second, to align on our legislative recommendations. I want to welcome Jeff Beckham, who is the Undersecretary for Legislative Affairs at the Office of Policy and Management, who will be standing in for Secretary McCaw. I'm sure that I am joining my fellow council members in sending her our very best and well wishes. I also want to welcome Kyle Abercrombie, who will be standing in as a proxy for Commissioner David Lehman, as he's unable to join us today. Over the last couple of months, we've heard from legislators, advocates, and the community regarding the challenges of the legislation as it relates to social equity in particular. And while we recognize the legislation will not satisfy everyone, we have made it our best effort to address what we've heard and balance it with what's possible. We'll share those recommendations today, as well as affirm what we have heard from the community, but recognize may be difficult to change, either due to previous political discourse or timing. So with that said, I would like to call the roll. Paige, if you can do that, that would be great.
Absolutely. Starting with Marilyn Alberio.
Present.
Ramon Arroyo. Corey Betts. Andrea Comer.
Here.
Fabian Durango. Avery Gaddis. Severa Gordon.
Present.
Michael Jefferson.
Present.
David Lehman, or his designee, Kyle Abercrombie.
Present.
Melissa McCaw, or her designee, Jeff Beckham.
I'm present.
Ojala Naeem.
Present.
Edwin Shirley.
Present.
Kelly Valeras.
Present.
And Joseph Williams.
Present.
Councilwoman Shaw.
For the record, Christine Shaw, designee of State Treasurer Sean Wooden.
Forgive me. Thank you.
If I may ask the council's grace, I would like to change the order just slightly of the agenda to allow for the discussion with the Office of the Attorney General to proceed the discussion on the legislative proposals. Just out of respect for her time. Thank you.
Okay.
I turn it over to Interim Executive Director Fly.
Hi. So hopefully everyone can see me. And I also added Eileen Mescal, who's also from my office. So she's here with me as well. So you all should have received the memo we submitted to the SEC yesterday concerning questions on the SEC's role in reviewing, denying, and approving license applications. It's a pretty detailed memo with some citations to the Public Act, so we encourage you to read it fully, but I'll just give a general big picture summary of what it says. So we met with Andrea and Jeannie Ray 3 weeks ago to discuss the guidance that the SEC was looking for. Everything in the memo points you to the appropriate areas in the Public Act that addresses the questions asked. Now, there are a lot of things that the SEC is tasked with. We do not address every single thing, but we focused on the license applications concerning social equity status, since that was the area that needed guidance. Part 1 of the memo concerns the Office of Social Equity. It reiterates that there is no such office in the Public Act, and the SEC consists of 15 individuals. The Public Act contemplates that the SEC would have a staff that it hired as necessary to discharge the duties of the council. The council can adopt policies and procedures for its internal operations. It can also adopt regulations that outline requirements and procedures for third parties, such as applicants. And the SEC could also have public hearings as it deems necessary. However, with any delegation of duty, the SEC will always be responsible for the duties it delegates to its staff. You can't be everywhere and do everything, so it is not uncommon to delegate responsibilities as needed to get all the work done that you're responsible for and that needs to get done. As for the role of the interim executive director, there was a question that by nature of the role being interim, were there any limitations? The answer is no. Nothing in the Public Act would suggest that interim has less responsibilities or duties of an executive director who was directly hired and not serving in interim capacity. So they serve the same. Part 2 of the memo goes into the review, denial, and approval of the social equity status portion of the application for applicants. The SEC is the entity responsible of laying out the criteria and identifying the documentation it needs to meet the criteria. Section 35A of the Public Act makes clear that the SEC is required to post the documentation requirements, quote, on its internet website to inform applicants of such requirements prior to the start of the application period, end quote. The SEC has a website, the DCP has a website, there's also a website for cannabis generally. As of yesterday, although this information might be available on the cannabis website, you don't have a designated area that's easy for people to find on the SEC website. I learned this morning that you do have the information in the news and announcement post that is on your website and it directs you to the cannabis website. But since the information is important under the Public Act, you should designate it on the SEC website so it's clear for applicants to find. Once the criteria is set, DCP begins to accept applications. DCP sets the maximum number of applicants that it would consider per license, and half of that is set aside for social equity applicants. When an applicant indicates that it wants to be considered as a social equity applicant, the necessary information to confirm if the applicant meets the criteria and qualifies is sent to the SEC for review by the DCP. The SEC is then asked to identify for the DCP if the applicant qualifies for social equity status. If they do qualify, then the DCP is notified, and DCP will then continue for further review for purposes of actually awarding the license itself. Nothing in the Public Act suggests that the SEC administers a lottery. DCP does all of that. Now, if the applicant does not qualify for social equity status, the DCP does not complete the review. The applicant is then notified and has 5 days to pay the full fee for entry into the general lottery for consideration of a license by DCP if it's selected out of the general lottery. And if the SEC finds an application that was sent to it by the DCP does not qualify for social equity status, the DCP will be notified and will request from the third-party lottery operator to identify the next ranked application in the social equity lottery, and that application will then go to the SEC for similar review. Does this applicant qualify for social equity status? And you keep doing that until you get to the maximum number. And then again, if it qualifies, you notify DCP and DCP will send. Now, also in Part 2A, we discussed whether there are any conflicts among the SEC during their review. The Public Act has the SEC very engaged in community initiatives and programs to ensure participation in the cannabis industry from communities that have been disproportionately harmed by cannabis prohibition. So overall, because the council does not select the application that it reviews, and the DCP completes the further review and approval to issue the license, there doesn't appear to be a conflict between the council's public engagement role and the ultimate review of the social equity status portion of the application that essentially is randomly coming before it from the third-party lottery. Nonetheless, all members of the council should review and understand the state of Connecticut rules on ethics, including their employees. Section 51 of the Public Act expressly outlines the scope of conflict of interest that it contemplates can exist among council members and staff employees. So you guys should definitely get familiar with Section 51. A question also came up on whether all council members were needed to vote on items. Well, the Public Act states that to transact business as a council, quorum is needed by the majority of the membership. So you have 15 members, majority to have quorum would be 8 members. And then from there, nothing in the Public Act states what you need to obtain for majority vote. So that means a simple majority of whatever's in quorum will work. And if you have, let's say, the minimum 8 people in quorum, that means 5 people out of the 8 would be a majority vote. And if you have all 15 of you attending, then majority vote would essentially be 8 people. Part 3 addresses the applicant's right to file an administrative appeal. If an applicant is notified that it does not qualify for social equity status, that applicant can then appeal the denial to the Superior Court in accordance with the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, which we kind of term the UAPA. Based on our review of other areas in the Public Act that allows for an appeal right, we believe the appeal is of the denial of the application because the applicant fails to qualify for social equity status. Nothing in the Public Act suggests that an applicant has a right to appeal if they're just denied a provisional license generally under either lotteries. So the issue on appeal is limited to not qualifying for social equity status. Also, please note that every record maintained in regards to the Public Act is a public record, and that's designated by the Public Act. So I forgot to include the citation in the memo, but that's in section 57E of the Public Act. So overall, in us answering all your questions, we suggest that the council members and the staff get some training on just general meeting procedures, on Freedom of Information Act requirements, and how to prepare a record under the UAPA. We think that will all be helpful for you guys moving forward as you kind of get through this. And that's the gist of the memo.
A nice hotel closer to the event.
Thank you so much, Attorney. Any questions, comments from the council?
Okay. Looks like I did my job.
Yep, Councilwoman Shaw.
Good morning, all, and thank you, Attorney Jean-Louis, or Jean-Louis. I don't want to mutilate the pronunciation of your name. But I want to thank you for your analysis. It answers most of the questions that I think have been posed by members of the council over the last several months. I do have a question. I appreciate you making clear the narrow focus of this particular memorandum as it relates to the SEC's role in the verification of social equity applicant status. You do make reference to other aspects of the act which fall within, and I'm looking for the page, which fall within the purview of the council, and that relates to, this is page 5. And this makes reference to the approval of the workforce development plans,
Yep.
as well as the ownership and control of joint ventures. So to be clear, those likewise fall within the explicit set of responsibilities for the council, correct? That
yes.
it may choose to delegate part of that responsibility to its staff or to an external provider?
Yes. But just
Okay.
like I said before, anything you delegate, the buck always stops with the council. Like, just imagine, if you're a commissioner of an agency, you can't be everywhere and do everything at once. You have people that you delegate to do certain things. You trust them to get the work done. And at the end of the day, if there's a mistake or something happens, it still stops with you. So you just have to decide what the process is that works for you to kind of get all those duties done.
And just to follow up, so a process where we delegate the evaluation of those 3 matters and then have final approval, that would satisfy our responsibilities under the statute.
Yep. Whatever
Yep.
works for you guys.
All right, thank you.
Any additional questions, comments? All righty. Thank you so much. You did a fabulous job. Really appreciate
Awesome.
the time.
Thank
Both
you.
you and Eileen, the time that you put into just reviewing really in a short period of time, and to have a thorough response. We are very grateful.
And if you have any follow-up questions, just let us know.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Alrighty. The next item on the agenda is the discussion on the legislative proposals. And for that, I will turn it over to Chairman Shirley and Councilman Jefferson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. The Policy Committee met last week to discuss those considerations for legislative change that were brought to the committee. The idea is that the committee would compile those requests or the proposals, and Councilman Michael Jefferson did graciously volunteer to take that on, and that we would come back to the full council today to present them and to have a vote on what was proposed, and then to bring that to the legislature. I think the way we would begin is to, there are not that many changes that were proposed, and I think we would start with just go through from section, with the section, the issue, and those considerations, and then open it up for questions or concerns, if that's okay with you, Madam Chair, as a mode to proceed. Is that all right? Thank you. All right, so section 149, the issue is currently there is no limit on the number of social equity applicants that can apply for DIA cultivator licenses if they pay a $3 million fee to forego the lottery process. This could potentially result in market oversaturation. By way of note, the 90-day application window for these applicants has opened already and is a one-time opportunity. Legislative change would take effect after the window closes. Therefore, there were no proposed legislative language change at this time. Is there a discussion on this issue from any member of the council? Yes, Councilman Shaw.
It's not a discussion on the issue, but forgive me, I don't have access to the document that you're referring to. It wasn't included with the agenda, at least the agenda I received. Can someone send it to me?
Yes, I just hit send on it to the full council. We just wrapped our policy committee meeting and it ended at 11 o'clock. So I apologize, but it should be in your inbox or en route to your inbox.
There it is.
Awesome.
Speak and you shall find. Thank you.
Shall we take a minute then to review that particular section and ask for questions?
Yes.
Would it be possible to share it on screen?
Absolutely, I can do that.
Okay, Councilman Williams, you look like you wanted to say something. You're muted.
Yeah, no, I just want, through you, Chairman, to Madam Chairman, the reason why this section 149 came up in the first place, and this is more directed to DCP, if they can get back to somewhat to the council, in the fact because we brought this up for if in case of oversaturation, because we know that DCP through Director Marriott said that we wanted to limit cultivation in the state to 1.2 million of canopy space. In the event that we receive more than 4, I understand that was what was said, that we kind of budgeted that we thought would pay the 3 million. In the case that it goes beyond that, has DCP put anything in place to address it in case there is oversaturation within the 90-day period?
Because of the way that the legislation is written, there is no, DCP does not have the ability to limit the number of licenses that would be issued under section 149.
I know, I realize that. I'm just saying, in the event that we reach saturation point, is DCP going to make recommendations to the legislature? You know what I mean? We're not addressing it here on this because we have no proposed changes, but it is a concern that if it happens, is anyone thinking about it?
Well, I think many people are thinking about it. I am unsure. I can tell you for this legislative session, DCP has not issued any recommendations with regard to Section 149.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes, Councilman Shaw. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
My apologies. So my understanding of the licensing process is that the discretion to determine the number of licenses rests with DCP. Is that correct?
Yes, there is some discretion. However, in terms of the number of, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that my reading of the statute is that because there is no limit, the ability of DCP to say we're stopping at this number is limited, for lack of a better word. Now, I'm going to hopefully get some clarity in the next couple of minutes, but that's my understanding at this point.
So I would like some clarity around that, because my understanding of the spirit of the law is that by preserving some discretion with DCP, that allows for real-time assessment of factors that could impact issues like market saturation. In other words, without knowing with any real degree of specificity how many applications of any particular license type they'll be received, the discretion allows for there to be course corrections. And even the process for the lottery, where there's, for every license granted to a social equity applicant, there's one to a non-social equity applicant, and that kind of balancing. So it just strikes me that it is really important to understand, what the implications of this are, because quite frankly, and just to use a concrete example, if there is a rush of applications with the $3 million fee, which likely will be the result of an equity joint venture, not always the case, but could be, then the objectives of the statute are being met, are they not? I mean, the
Right.
downside is that, for those who don't have the $3 million fee and we're relying on the traditional lottery process, there may not be any more capacity, but that system, I think, already contemplates that there could be, that there are measures in place to limit the number of licenses, so that the market doesn't take shape in a way that's unintended, if you will.
Right. So the statute does provide DCP to have some limits with regard to the lottery. There is no discretion for DCP in Section 149
But there's discretion elsewhere
for the lottery. Yes.
for lottery and for the number of other types of licenses.
Yes. Section 149 there's a reason it's separate and apart from the lottery sections. I will say that part of the reason that I know that there was significant interest in how many licenses for cultivators would be offered through the lottery, and part of the reason why that has not been determined yet is because we do not yet know how many Section 149 cultivator applications and licenses will come through.
Madam Chair, I have a question then. In the event, let's follow up Council Shaw's question. In the event that in this 90-day, we reach the saturated point that DCP has alluded to at previous council meetings, what then happens to the remaining portion of the lottery of the micro cultivators? Does that go away? If we meet the 1.2 million of canopy that is actually recommended, which is the saturated point, then is there no, you know what I'm saying? Or I'm asking, is the state prepared in the case that the unlimited amount of the 3 million fees is paid, we reach 1 point something million of canopy space, which then means there's no room for the 20 micro-grow that right now DCP is allotted in the lottery. What is that to address? I think we should talk about that in some kind of capacity at some point, because that is it could be a likelihood. We don't know, but in the event it does happen, what will be the response from DCP?
Wouldn't that have to be, Councilman Williams, wouldn't that have to be addressed before there's any language or change in the language of that statute? That would have to be addressed, right?
I'm asking the question, Councilman.
That's what I would imagine, that it would have to be addressed before you make those kind of changes. You just can't say you reach that point and then there's no more land, there's no more room. You just can't. You have to have the room, or you're buying yourself a lawsuit.
This is my point. I
think
when Director
it does
came,
indicate the fact that we should
DCP did indicate
we should cap. The only thing we're suggesting is that 149 should be revisited for the purposes stated right here.
Correct.
Now, if they decide to move in that direction based on our recommendation, they will have to take what you're offering into consideration. And nothing stops us from presenting that along with this.
Correct.
So I think it's an excellent point.
And Councilman Williams, I know if the document we have, the legislative considerations, says that we at this point are proposing, there's no proposed change to the language. What I'm hearing, though, from both you and Councilman Jefferson is that we should preserve the right to revisit this at some point?
Or add additional information for consideration. If in fact you move forward on this, you have to take in these other considerations. You got to take in the fact of what Councilman Williams raised. You have to.
So, and I'm asking, is that a point, is that something, what shall we call it? Is that a resolution at this point that we should vote on as a council?
We'll make it an addendum to the recommendation. It's a simple matter. I don't think we can vote. We don't have to vote, but it's just an addendum that has to be considered.
If I can
please.
just through you, Mr. Chair, just as a point of clarification or a point of information, the section 149 is a 90-day window. It will be closed by the time just the session is complete.
All right, so there really is no, I guess what you're suggesting is that there is nothing we would propose now would be put in place until after the 90-day window has closed.
Right.
And therefore there's no action, frankly, that we can take.
And as referenced in the document, it is a one-time opportunity. So.
One-time opportunity. All right. Then I guess if there are no other questions or no more comments on that particular section, let's move to the next one. All right. Section 40. This language does not limit the number of equity joint ventures for certain license types. As a result, a multi-state operator could have an unlimited number of EJVs with a social equity applicant. While the resources, knowledge, and infrastructure support would certainly benefit those social equity applicants that find an MSO partner, those less attractive SEAs, social equity applicants, the ones who most need a leg up, could be left out of the market, which could easily become oversaturated with unlimited equity joint ventures. A note here, imposing a limit on EJVs would lessen the likelihood that larger entities would dominate the market through EJV creation. via the lottery process, but would not impact producers and retailers that create equity joint ventures. Right now, there's no proposed legislative language change to this section. However, Councilman Williams, do you wish to comment on that? We had some discussion on this a few minutes ago.
Yeah, the only comment is that in section 40, I wanted to just echo some of the sentiments of the public since February 3rd of the number of applications that SCAs can put out through large multi-state operators that are billion-dollar corporations, that their strategy is to pay whatever amounts of fees so they have a better chance of winning more licenses. And it begs the question that can the legislature look at possibly of that per individual, per LLC, the shared common ownership within the application process, that maybe they should possibly put a number on those MSOs of how many applications they actually put in. The downside to that, of course, is just if we're looking at fees from the application process, that is a concern, which on the back end that Madam Chair alluded to, that will help out later on through the Innovation Fund and those for the community. But at the same time, I have a concern, and others, that they raise a good point, that when we talk about the billion-dollar corporations that are in this industry, that control this industry, we're like fresh meat on a stick as it relates to Connecticut and our lottery, as it relates to them being able to flood the market, for them to have a better opportunity and chance to win the lottery and win slots in the lottery. So my recommendation is I wanted the legislature to go back and look at section within 40, 27, or 45, that may be addressed, because that is a grave concern, and I can see it clearly. An individual may scrape up $1,500 to want to apply. $100,000 to a billion-dollar corporation in this business is nothing. And one, is causing a lot of work for the council or our third party to review. Second, it creates an unfair advantage for the DIA, which we're trying to reserve that section for. And so that's just some things I just want to bring up at this point, because I think it should be addressed within 4027 or section 145.
That's a recommendation that lies outside of and I think Councilman Williams raising a good point, but that's a recommendation that lies outside of what we're saying here, that's in front of you, because this is very, very important. And if we're going to move forward, I think let's move forward on what we're presenting right here, and allow Councilman Williams' concerns to be move forward as a recommendation to review the law. But this is what we're asking, the legislature to review immediately.
Right.
Right.
Yep. Councilwoman Shaw, yes.
So I have a question that really is directed to anyone who has the answer, and it's prompted by Mr. Williams' comments. And really, if I understand the substance of the recommendation and the problem, we're focusing on, creating a level playing field for social equity applicants, and trying to prevent against kind of some cherry picking by some well-resourced outside multi-state operators. Is that it? So
Yes.
rather than look at, the opportunity set for the multi-state operators, which, this brings forth a whole other host of issues. I want to focus on the number of social equity applicants, which at the end of the day, once this program is up and running, where we've run through the full gamut of the various license types, has anyone estimated the number of social equity applicants who will likely be participating in the market once it's up and running? I mean, it's got to be, what, 3 or 4 dozen? In my mind, that's what I'm thinking. Does anyone know? Has anyone estimated the universe of potential social equity applicants in the cannabis market once it's up and running? And once all of the licenses for everything from cultivators to micro cultivators to, the array of the 14 different license types.
I mean, those associated directly with either retail sales or growth, but not necessarily the transporters or the other laboratory openers. So we're just people who are directly involved in the vertical between growing cannabis and selling cannabis.
Correct.
Yeah, that would be hard.
Do we, has DCP made an estimate on that? Do we know?
No,
I mean, just a back of the envelope, and again, just on the basis of participating in these discussions around the licensing process, the expectations from DCP have been explained to us. It doesn't seem like the universe of social equity applicants at the end of the day who will be awarded provisional licenses is a terribly large group. So anyway, my point is this. One of the ongoing discussions amongst members of this council has been the extent to which technical support will be necessary in order to support social equity applicants. That is an issue that has yet to be, decided. The amount of resources, the kind of capital investment in their infrastructure so they can run these enterprises. I guess what I'm suggesting is that there may not be not every social equity applicant is going to be awarded a license. We, I think, have to satisfy for ourselves that not only are the criteria satisfied, but that the applicants have pulled together, that have advanced an application which would suggest they're going to succeed, right? And there are some applicants who fulfill the criteria, but may have inadequate, structure when it comes to ownership and control. They may not have, when weighing two applications, one may be more likely to offer a workforce development plan, a kind of a strategy for, selecting like location and their backers might have very specific experience. All I'm suggesting is that there are a whole host of factors which may lead to the conclusion that there are a lot of social equity applicants who will not be able to participate. And so I say all that to say that as we think about limitations on and any rules which impact these equity joint ventures, which is to my thinking, one of the clearest pathways for a social equity applicant to secure the requisite financing to get the upfront costs. Again, I'm a student of cannabis and the regulation of cannabis, and even just the process of understanding the extraordinary investment which some of the members of the public who have come to testify before this council, sharing with us how very methodical and diligent they are in pulling together the elements of a viable application. All I'm suggesting is that, I think we should exercise some caution in limiting and really tinkering with the number of equity joint ventures, because quite frankly, I don't know what a viable application looks like. We're talking about different bits and pieces, what's within DCP's control, what's within the Social Equity Council's control. But at the end of the day, and I lean on my fellow council member, Mr. Shirley, who has spent a career evaluating, pro forma projections on the likelihood of new ideas, new business ventures. There are a lot of elements which go into whether a license should be awarded, and it's a very resource-intensive process. One that the pathway to those colorable applications, I think we should exercise some caution in limiting that pathway.
Thank you, Councilman. So I'm saying we should change anything in the EJV. I agree with the way the structure of the EJVs are concerned. And there's already language in the law that even the EJVs, because if it's on the retail side of things, which most of them will convert for, there's a 20-mile radius and being connected so small, you really have to be in the four corners, because you will not be able to grow. So there's already limits within the law. Whoever came up with that was brilliant. What I am talking about specifically is just the number and the volume of applications, and not being fair for those in the DIA themselves being able to put in maybe one or two licenses versus a multi-state operator who has billions of dollars who would want to say, I'm putting in 300. And for the possibility of getting, as many as they can possibly get. That's what I'm actually alluding to. That has not been addressed in the law. I'm making a suggestion that hopefully the legislature will look at that, because that is an area of concern, not only for myself, but for the general public and those in the DIA, that we're trying to say we want to be social equity.
So if I could sort of summarize that, I think, we're making the recommendation to the legislation. We recognize that any changes, the application process is already open, so any changes can't be made to that process without causing disruption. And I think that we need to see what comes in. This is all based on assumption. We don't know if we're going to get 100, EJV applications coming in from 2 out-of-state, kind of multi-state operators. I think there's a lot we need to learn through that process. And unfortunately, I don't think we've got a lot to point to in other states where we've seen, hey, there's been a ton of applications that have come in this. So I think, just to kind of get to the point, because I know we've got a lot of policy recommendations to get through in this meeting. We're making the recommendation that this is something of concern. I think that we as a council need to monitor it. I would say that the third party that we are using needs to report back to us on what they're seeing coming in from an EJV perspective. And then, if it seems like a much more critical thing where there are hundreds of applications coming in from that perspective, we need to take some action on it.
I agree with all 3 individuals. I think Ojala really summed it up. And Councilwoman Shaw, I think we should proceed with absolute caution, because I agree with you. I think the EJVs are, for the social equity applicant, that works for us. I think that is the bridge. That is, but we have to be concerned. And this is mere speculation, quite frankly. Right. What we're offering is theoretical in nature. So, but moving forward, I think this brings a healthy balance to all our concerns. At least put it on the table for consideration. And I think that's what policy is offering.
As I heard Councilman Williams in our previous meeting suggest a limit to the number of applications, and what I envisioned was somehow there is a tactic from a well-heeled MSO that they could put 50 license applications with the only with the intent of having 2, but somehow having a plethora of licenses would be beneficial to a plethora of applications is somehow beneficial. And what I heard him say was that we should, and the rationale made sense to from the standpoint of some evaluating body being overwhelmed by having several dozen licenses from one applicant. So how are we going to, do we want to phrase that in a recommendation? That's my question.
My recommendation is simply that, I think the legislature should look at the common ownership of boards of the backers that are going to partner with social equity applicants, that number should be limited. That's all I'm saying. It's
and
right
we have
now.
We have it in the document that was just shared out with the full council. While we don't have recommended legislation changes, we do have it listed there as a item of concern. So I'm not sure what more we need to do beyond that. But I feel like we're spinning on this topic, and where it's 11:50 and we've got a lot of other pieces to run through.
Well, okay, and so let's flag it as an element of concern and have it presented, unless there's it sounds like a consensus to having this presented to the legislature as an area of concern without any more specificity to that. Is that correct?
That's
Correct.
correct.
I'm going to
Yes,
assume,
that's correct.
okay. Let's move on then to section 27. This section allows producers converting to an expanded producer license to pay a reduced fee if they form 2 EJVs. However, that requirement has no associated timeline. And the note here is the legislative language should require producers to establish an EJV no later than 1 year after receiving a hybrid license. The proposed change, section 27G, if a producer had paid a reduced conversion fee as described in subsection B of section 26 of this act at the time of conversion application and subsequently did not create at least 2 equity joint ventures under this section that each obtained a final license within 14 months of that conversion application. The producer shall be liable for the remainder of the full conversion fee of $3 million. Any comment on that? Then let's assume that is a recommendation we will put forward.
And through you, Chairman Shirley, if I can just add that it also proposes the addition of a section H, and this would be both for section 27 and for section 145. An expanding producer shall create not more than 2 equity joint ventures unless such additional equity joint ventures in conjunction with the same producer have obtained provisional licenses by effective date of this section. No equity joint venture that shares a common individual that satisfies the requirements of section 148A and B with another equity joint venture shall be approved by the council. So that responds to the request for a limit. And just to expand on this a bit, in talking with a few legislators, including the one who really pushed for the equity joint venture language, the statement was clear that the intent was never for it to exceed 2. And so that was why this language is proposed.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Madam Chair.
The wording, yes, the wording currently says at least, and the legislators have indicated that they wanted to be no more than 2.
It was
And so
up to instead of at least is what you're proposing.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Any other comments on that? Okay. Section 145. This section allows a dispensary converting.
Yes, through you, Chairman Shirley, the language is pretty much mirrored. It is just that section 145 references dispensaries and as opposed to producers.
I got it. Thank you. All right. So we're at, thank you very much for that. 148. This section caps the number of retailers and micro cultivators a municipality can allow to 1 for every 25,000 residents. There are more than 100 municipalities in Connecticut that fit this requirement and was a large factor in the number of licenses DCP has agreed to hold lotteries for. Language eliminating the cap would enable municipalities to have more than 1 retailer and micro producer, thereby increasing the number of licenses awarded in these categories. And the proposal is to delete the language in section 148E, which would allow the municipalities to decide themselves how many licenses they would allow operating in their municipality.
Yes, and just to be clear, this does not in any way mitigate the municipality's ability to have a moratorium or to outright say no, as some of them have, but it would then allow for those municipalities that do want to create space to have more than one of the micro cultivator and the retailer, if they so choose.
All right. Thank you. Any other discussion on that question, concerns about that proposal? All right. The IMRP did make several recommendations with regard to the definition of social equity applicant, and the committee thought that we might want to revisit that with the IMRP to make sure that we are on the same page as they before we make any proposals to the legislature.
That's correct.
Any question about that? All right. If not, I mean that is I don't think I've left out anything. Let me make sure. So in effect, we will revisit with the IMRP with regard to their definition of social equity applicant and disproportionately impacted area before we make any recommendations to the legislature. And with that, those are all the changes or proposal for changes that that we received. Are there any questions or concerns?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think we would probably need if the full council is to approve these, we would need a motion to approve the recommendations with regards to the legislation, as well as to include areas of concern, those that Councilman Williams noted, as well as Councilwoman Shaw, and then also to include a further evaluation of the study, the commission study recommendations.
Thank you. So
that's a long resolution, but
is that a motion?
yes.
So move.
May I get a second?
Second.
Is there any more discussion on that?
Yes, as we
Councilwoman Shaw?
consider, thank you. As we consider these legislative recommendations, are there any aspects of the Attorney General's review that would warrant any clarification regarding the statute?
I'm not
Yeah, through you, Chairman Shirley, I did not think so, but if you believe there are,
No, I just wanted to make sure we took, the one bite at the apple, and that is presenting the fullness of what it is we recommend, and just wanted to make sure, given the information we received this morning. But I'm fine with that. Just a question.
Just have
Right,
one
yes.
clarity in the,
Yes.
of the resolution. We're not resolving to accept the changes that the commission had proposed based on their interviews, but we're accepting the consideration. Is that how you're putting that?
so the motion was to accept the legislative recommendations that have been discussed here, to include the considerations that have been raised, particularly with regard to the number of applications and the section 149 not having a limit, and then also to further evaluate the proposals that were provided through the study.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that we were evaluating the proposals through the study, not that we were voting on them. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairman. This is Jeff Beckham, OPM. Is the council going to make these recommendations for the General Assembly to consider something this session? Is that what this vote is? We are sending these to the General Assembly? Okay.
Yes.
That's good, because the raise bill deadlines are next week.
Yes.
I'll be abstaining from this vote. We reserve the right to consider any legislative changes that are brought forward as an administration, and we're not prepared to take a position today on these.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? And we have one abstention. We have one opposed.
Councilwoman Gordon opposed.
No, I'm not. I didn't oppose. Sorry. I voted in favor of. I apologize. I think I just have a little bit of a delay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
I'm also going to abstain from the vote.
We have one abstention, yes.
Two
Two
abstentions.
Two.
Just
Two
do.
abstentions?
Yes.
Okay.
Undersecretary Beckham and Councilwoman Valeries.
I see. All right, thank you. All right, Madam Chair, that concludes the policy committee's work from the past week.
Thank you so much, Councilman Shirley. We are right at 12 o'clock. So if there is nothing for the good of the order, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And have a second.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
You got it.
Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you,
Take care.
everyone.